Okay, good afternoon, everybody. So it's time to get started. So today we're going to be dealing with chapters 11 and 12 in your version of the Henry Hazlitt Economics in One Lesson. That deals, the both of them actually deal with the different sides of the same problem, namely trade protectionism, free trade and protectionism. And the drill is again the same. The book, or chapters rather, demonstrate in a relatively simple and clear-cut fashion how the law of broken window or broken window fallacy functions in the area of free trade and protectionism. The same fallacy that we identified initially at an abstract level and later on demonstrated on a couple of examples from current economic policies, that certain types of ideas or certain type of economic policies that have short-term benefits for isolated groups of people in the long run turn out to be harmful for the society as a whole, and sometimes even for the people who were supposed to be benefiting from that policy as well. So today we deal with the trade policy, with the tariffs. The crucial first chapter, or chapter 11, is titled Who is Protected by Tariffs? And it analyzes the mechanics of this type of economic policy. How is it enacted? What is the proposed goal of this policy? And what are the effects, the unintended long-term effects of this policy? So then why don't we start simply with the basic definition of terms? So can somebody try and define for us a tariff or tariffs? What are tariffs? What? So it's essentially a form of tax on imported goods. So you have either a free trade regime in which there are no extra specific taxes for imported goods, or you have tax that importers have to pay in order to sell foreign goods in the United States, or for that matter in any other country as well. Good. Let's then turn to the first significant problem, or the first significant topic related to tariffs. What are usual, or what is the most usual, most common justification for tariffs? People who propose tariffs, they have certain arguments why we need to adopt them. What are these arguments? You're not going to evaluate them or criticize them or even analyze them more in depth for now. We just want to make sure what are these arguments. Why people come up with the ideas such as tariffs. What do you want to chip? Sir, go ahead. Okay, so that's one argument. So tax revenue. So any new taxes, it's a new tax revenue for the government. So then we can increase government spending. That's one possible argument. Originally, in the American Constitution, we have Article 1, Section 8. Congress has the authority to impose tariffs. And the primary purpose of the tariffs, originally, according to the original design of the Constitution, was to provide a revenue for the federal government. At that time, federal government was very small as compared to what it is nowadays. And domestic taxation didn't exist. Federal taxation didn't exist. So income tax was unconstitutional. So, income tax became constitutional at the federal level in 1916. The 17th Amendment had to be passed in order for income tax to, as nowadays the main source of revenue for the federal government to be imposed. So tariff revenue was the main source of revenue for this small government in the 18th, 19th century, and all the way up until of the First World War. So how small that government was, maybe the best illustration of that would be to calculate how much government spending was in terms of GDP, as a percentage of GDP. So it never went beyond 5% of GDP. It's usually 3-4% GDP, gross domestic product, went for government spending. You know how much is it now? It's like 3-5% of all the value of goods and services that we create are spent through the government. And about 90% of that is paid through taxes. It's like almost 10 times increase, tenfold increase in the government spending as a percentage of national income in the 20th century. So then you can see why in the 19th century you can finance a lion's share of government expenditure at the federal level from tariff revenue. Even with relatively modest tariffs, you could discharge enough tax revenue for government spending. Okay, what else is the argument? I bet you probably noticed that this is not the most commonly used argument nowadays. And people who advocate for tariffs on the political right and political left, they don't typically mean that we need more tax revenue and that we're going to provide it by tariffs. We now we have income tax, we have corporate income tax, we have all kinds of other types of taxation. We have a very large government debt. That this tax revenue argument is not predominant anymore. What is much more common nowadays? Okay, so geopolitical a tariff on Chinese goods in order to politically punish Chinese communist government for whatever they happen to be doing. So this national security geopolitical angle. You can use tariffs as an instrument of disciplining governments that behave in a fashion that our government doesn't approve of. Very well. What else?
Do tariffs encourage purchasing in the United States?
Yeah. So now the entire set of arguments stemming from economic nationalism produce import substitution, it's called. It means we are importing too many goods. If we increase tariffs, we're going to discourage the importation. We're going to encourage domestic production by America. So tariffs encourage buying American by making imported goods more expensive. Another kind of corollary of that, or kind of side argument, which is a very important one, politically important one, is saving domestic jobs. So there are domestic industries that produce whatever they happen to be producing, clothing or plastic or aluminum or glass, whatever. And the imported goods from China, the competition from China or India or whatever can sell at a cheaper price. If we impose the tariffs, we're going to protect domestic jobs. Those companies will go bankrupt, or many of them will have to scale back, to scale down their operations. So tariffs help domestic jobs. Another argument is the trade deficit. So that's a very common argument for tariffs. So what is a trade deficit? So America has a very large trade deficit with China. What does that mean?
Import when we export?
Yeah. Our import is much larger than exports. So Chinese are selling much more in dollar value, much higher quantity of goods in America than Americans are selling in China. So then if we impose tariffs, we're going to discourage imports and we're going to reduce the gap between exports and imports. That's another argument that is very commonly used. You'll see that Hazlitt doesn't quite buy this argument. In chapter 12, he deals with this entire panoply of policies that are geared towards encouraging export and discouraging imports. And tariffs are one of those policies. Want to reduce the imports. Okay, so these are some of the arguments. Trade deficit, protecting domestic jobs, geopolitical considerations, and tax revenue. That's pretty much everything. Almost everything, most important arguments. Now, what are the counter arguments? So theoretically, economically, in terms of economic theory, the first and most consistent refutation, rejection of the protectionist arguments for tariffs was provided in Adam Smith's book, The Wealth of Nations, that we mentioned already, published in 1776. So this book, the entire, like a 30%, 40% of the book, an entire third part of the book was exclusively devoted to the discussions of international trade, developing the basic principles of international trade theory and refutation of what has been called at that time mercantilism, which is nowadays called protectionism. So what is mercantilism? Mercantilism was an economic theory dominating Europe in early modern period, in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, arguing that, number one, economics is a zero-sum game, which means for one agent or for one country to gain, somebody else has to lose. The sum total of gain, of losses and benefits is always zero. Wealth is not something that you create. It's not a positive sum game. It's a zero-sum game. You become wealthy by taking wealth from somebody else. This is a general picture of how the economy works. An image of this zero-sum type of game was taken from politics, theory of international relations. And you have it even nowadays, the idea that my country can become more powerful in international relations only at the expense of somebody else. There's like a fixed quantity of political power and domination in the world, and if I get more powerful, that means that somebody else is getting less powerful. This balance of power theory of international relations, that it's always competition for power, and that we cannot be getting better off and more powerful everybody in the same time, that somebody else has to go down in order for America to emerge as a whole. Power somebody else's fortunes have to darken. So this was realized very quickly, that very often in international relations the countries are hostile, and there is this competitive logic, competitive in a bad sense of the word. You want to hurt. The only way for you to become more powerful is to hurt another country. So this picture of international relations in the political realm was then transported or transplanted into the economic reason. My economic benefit has to be based somehow on hurting the other countries. So then the ideas such as tariffs or eliminating trade deficit, having a trade surplus, were part of the mercantilist theory. The idea that wealth is reflected in the quantity of money that you have, gold and silver. And the economic power of a country is reflected in how powerful and wealthy its government is. And how powerful and wealthy its government was determined by how much gold or silver the king's treasury has. And in order for king's treasury to have more gold and silver, you need then to export more rather than to import. So when you export, you get gold in exchange because gold was international money. Everybody was trading in gold and silver. So then the accumulation of specie, accumulation of precious metals like gold and silver, was considered to be a sign of economic well-being of a country as well. So then an entire structure of economic restrictions, such as tariffs, non-tariff barriers, and prohibitions and controls of international trade and movement of capital and labor were imposed in 17th and 18th century. And that was the predominant view until Adam Smith's book came out. Subsidies as well. The idea that we need to subsidize domestic industries in order to better compete with the foreigners. So this militaristic logic all the time, that our companies have to beat the foreigners. We need to outcompete them in all areas. So what Adam Smith had shown is actually that this concept of economics as a kind of military competition for power was wrong-headed, that it misunderstood the way how wealth is created in a market economy. That the logic of that there is much more room for economic cooperation in economics than there is in political realm. Yeah, in politics, indeed, there is this ruthless competition for power where my gain has to be created at the expense of your gain or with your loss. In economics, that's not the way how things work. In economics, actually, the economic cooperation creates gains for all parties involved. And the basic principle from which it follows that international trade is a good thing is the logic of specialization and division of labor. Adam Smith says that. In everyday economic life, within one single country, not everybody produces everything that they consume. So we specialize. We drink milk, but not very few of us are farmers, dairy farmers. We buy computers, but very few among us are computer engineers or whatever. Why is specialization or division of labor necessary? Because it increases economic productivity, and everybody agrees about that, and everybody understands that. And Adam Smith formulated that very first chapter of his book, the division of labor is productive economically. Specialization is productive. Now the argument is, why would this be any different when we expand beyond national borders? Why the logic of specialization and division of labor would break down if we involve other countries as well? If it's mutually productive for all of us to cooperate with the farmers, to buy milk from farmers in North Dakota, to buy computers made by software and hardware engineers in California or wherever, why would it be any different when it comes to trading with the software engineers in India, or with the farmers in China and Europe, or with manufacturing workers in Germany? Why would it be any different? It's mutually beneficial. In the same way, it's mutually beneficial to make a division of labor within a single country. Moreover, it's better and better, larger the size of the market, greater the benefits of exchange. That was one crucial insight that Adam Smith developed. He said that the benefits of division of labor are determined by the size of the market, which means larger the number of people involved, greater the benefits of division of labor. Why is that the case? What do you think? Then it's contrary, it's the other way around, that more you go beyond national borders, the logic of mutually beneficial exchange is getting stronger and stronger rather than weaker and weaker. First, we can specialize in making more things. Just if 4 of us are society, this economic unit, we can specialize only in producing 4 things. If we want to be productive to the maximum possible level, we can specialize in producing 4 things: bread, butter, milk, and meat. Nobody to work on computers, nobody to specialize in making automobiles, nobody to specialize in making other things. So larger number of people, we can specialize in producing more things. So that's one effect of specialization. The second effect is actually stronger the competition. More people you have, even if you don't increase it, when we go from 4 people in an economic community to 8 people in an economic community, even if we don't increase the number of articles that we produce, the competition for producing the existing 4 will be much stronger. Than we will get actually better prices, lower prices, and better quality, because we have 4 more people to compete against the existing 4. So these are 2 reasons, actually. The expansion or deepening of the division of labor, in the sense that more stuff could be produced when you have a larger number of people. And number 2, stronger competition brings down the prices and increases the quality of goods. So that's why you have ever wondered why you have a better supply, a more diverse menu of choices in New York for restaurants than in Bismarck, North Dakota. It's not necessarily that they are smarter, better in food. Much larger number of people, much greater benefits of division of labor. Yeah. Have a market for more than just the basic stuff that you have in a smaller city. So nobody denies actually that it's better for Americans, for us in North Dakota, to be cooperating with Californians and Texans and Floridans and other people in the United States. We know intuitively very well that we are better off. No bananas, no wine for us. Imagine that we are closed economic units here. Nobody would be drinking any wine, because you cannot make wine here, as far as I know. There are no vineyards, commercially successful vineyards. Am I correct? Are there any in North Dakota? Not that I know. It's impossible. So no grape wines, no wine, no bananas, no oranges. I mean, imagine, no salmon, unless you make an artificial fishery. So we understand very well the benefits of national cooperation with America. And then once you cross the national borders, what changes? Nothing changes. The benefits just increase. Just in the same way, it's better. We are better off when we cooperate with Californians and Texans in the United States. We are even more better off when we cooperate with Quebecois in France, or with Spaniards or Italians, Chileans, or Chinese, for that matter. So that's the argument. That's the argument that Adam Smith actually arrived at. That the case for international free trade, or the case against tariffs, is based on a very logical division of labor and specialization, gains from specialization. Once you start imposing tariffs, what you're doing, actually, you're obstructing the system of, you're limiting the benefits of division of labor. The same would have happened if you imagine that somebody imposed tariffs on bananas from Florida or oranges from Florida. You would consider that an attack on the standard of living in North Dakota, and for good reasons. The exact same thing applies to international restrictions of free trade. There is one passage that I wanted to read you from this chapter that talks about one quotation from Adam Smith at the beginning of the chapter that connects the division of labor at a very basic, primitive level of a single family with a global economic currents. In the division of labor at the level of the economy as a whole. So he says, this is page 75. It is the maxim of every prudent master of a family, never to attempt to make at home what it will cost him more to make than to buy. Which means if you cannot make your shoes at lower cost than the shoemaker, you shouldn't be making your shoes, you should be buying. The tailor does not attempt to make his own shoes, but buys them of the shoemaker. The shoemaker does not attempt to make his own clothes, but employs a tailor. The farmer attempts to make neither the one nor the other, but employs those different artificers. Artificer. It's an old language, 18th century. All of them find it for their interest to employ their whole industry in a way, their whole industry meaning all of their resources, in a way in which they have some advantage over their neighbors. So this is, remember, comparative advantage that we discussed. So if you can make something at a lower opportunity cost than somebody else, you should specialize in that. I'm assuming that you know this principle of comparative advantage that we discussed a while ago in the semester. All of them find this, and to purchase with a part of its produce, or what is the same thing, with the price of a part of it, whatever part of the produce that they make, part of the revenue that they earn by selling the products they specialize in, whatever else they have occasion for. What is prudence, now the key sentence, the key conclusion here. What is prudence in the conduct of every private family can scarce be folly in that of a great kingdom. Which means those simple principles of specialization, division of labor, and deriving benefits from specialization should be applied in general economic policy, not only in individual lives. So if Chinese workers can produce plastic toys cheaper than Americans, we shouldn't be specializing then in making plastic toys. We should specialize in something else. That's the basic argument. Now, international trade theory, modern trade theory, pretty much begins and ends with this simple insight. It is infinitely more complicated in terms of technical economic analysis and apparatus that economists use, but the basic gist, the basic essence of the argument is the same nevertheless. It doesn't go much beyond this. Now, we already defined what were the main, or what are the main arguments for tariffs put forward by their proponents. Now we need to square to see at which points these two type of arguments clash or are in contradiction. These four arguments for tariffs and classical standard Adam Smith type argument for free trade based on the benefits of specialization. And essentially Hazlitt does this in his chapter through the prism of this model of broken window fallacy. So he uses two scenarios, two simple models to illustrate the problems with the tariff policy. The first one is what's going to happen if we already have a tariff put in place? So we have an industry that is protected by a tariff and that is going to go bankrupt, that is going to disappear if we abolish the tariff. So that's the first example. The second model, or second simple, let's say, thought experiment, which is the same thing as the model, is we have a free trade, but then somebody proposes to impose the tariff. What happens? So in both cases, we look at two kinds of effects, two kinds of consequences of this. The first kind of effects are those short-term, narrow, isolated effects for some groups of people. What happens to the workers in a given industry or to capitalists who own the shares in a given industry and so on in the short run? And long-term effects, what happens to the society as a whole? What are systematic and unintended consequences for the society as a whole? So what happens in the first case? You abolish the tariffs. Can somebody just briefly outline what would be the most obvious effects of abolishing the tariff one? He uses the example of sweater industry, of woolen sweater industry. So you will have a substitution of domestic goods to some degree with cheaper foreign goods. So the reason why we do have a tariff is actually have domestic sweaters were sold for $30 because domestic industry is the cost of production are almost $30, whereas the foreigners can sell at 25. So then if we abolish the tariff, then we will, domestic industry will be selling still at $30, whereas the foreigners could sell at 25, so domestic industry would have gone down. So increase in import, decrease in domestic production of sweaters. What else? Short term, first order effect. Right? What happens first? What about the employment and unemployment rate in the economy? So workers will be losing their jobs. So that's a worry. If you abolish those restrictions, people who used to work in the sweater industry, the textile industry, would be out of work now. Okay, are there any benefits of this for anybody? What do you think? Would there be any benefits of the abolition of textile tariff? Okay, where do you want to go first? Yeah.
If the textile industry is being purchased domestically, unfortunately, probably the sweaters going around, so with the launch of tariff and becoming international, it would be more, it would be better for the people sometimes. Maybe not to the extreme that would.
Why would it be better?
There's a need for cheap product, and it's not being fulfilled.
Okay, so what's going to happen to the prices of sweaters? General price line, when you abolish the tariff. Why do you think it will go up?
Because and we rely on the big actions.
Yeah. But why did we impose the tariffs in the first place? Because we are more expensive than foreigners. If you abolish the tariff, what's going to happen? Price goes down because foreigners now don't have to pay. Foreigners can sell at $25 a piece, and tariff is $5. We abolish the $5 tariff, they can now sell at 25. So the prices go down. Domestic sweater industry goes bankrupt, foreigners sell at $25. So cheaper for consumers. So more sweaters being bought at cheaper prices. So that's one effect, one good effect for consumers. Is there anything else? Can you explain that?
Well, since people are buying more at cheaper prices, I guess they're going to have more money to spend. So their wages technically went up, right?
Yeah, in a sense, because they're now paying $25 for a sweater instead of $30. That means that they save $5 for something else. So then the demand for other goods and services will increase to some degree. It may not be dramatic, but some additional demand for other goods and services will increase. So that means that the prices, the revenue of the firms that sell other goods and services would go up slightly, then the wages in those industries will go up slightly. So there is a benefit for an economy as a whole, indirectly. So more sweaters being sold, good for consumers at lower prices. And this is called sometimes income effect, this idea that when the price of one good goes down, actually the purchasing power of the remaining part of your income increases. Actually, you can buy more other stuff. So I see that abolition of tariffs has an income effect, positive income effect. It means that people can afford to buy more other things. Interest rate goes down and you have your mortgage payment go down. It's a powerful income effect. You can afford to buy more other consumer goods right now. So something similar is here. Anything that reduces the costs of buying any consumer goods has indirect positive effects for other industries. And also another indirect effect here, more importation from the Brits, more exportation from the Brits, or more importation of British or foreign goods. Let's say Hazlitt uses the example of English. Because, 1946, that's the beginning of the post-war period. China and many other countries were outside of the international economic system at that time. It's just Western Europe, Canada, and the United States, Australia and Novi Zealand. That was New Zealand. I'm sorry, I pronounced the new in Serbian. Sounds similar. Novi. So New Zealand, Australia, Canada, Western Europe, not the whole of Europe, just Western Europe. England, Norway, Denmark, Germany, Italy, Spain, that kind of, Austria. So they now sell more sweaters, they get what they get in exchange? Dollars. What can they do with their dollars? Buy other stuff in America. So the demand, indirectly, then the demand, this abolition of tariffs will increase the demand for American goods. It will indirectly stimulate the American exports. Let's say that the English don't want to buy any American produced goods. They have some surplus dollars and they don't want to buy any more consumer goods or producer goods, manufactured goods or anything in America. What else can they do with the dollars? They're certainly not going to bury them in the ground or burn them. They want some useful employment for the dollars that they get from American buyers. What else can they do? What Chinese and Japanese are routinely now doing. All countries with which we have a trade deficit, they do this to a large extent. Sir? Yeah, buying other stuff here. What is this other stuff that they can buy, if not just goods and services? Real estate, golf clubs, stocks and bonds, government bonds. Who are the biggest creditors of American federal government? Chinese and Japanese. By far the largest creditors, American government. Corporate stock. So how does that benefit us as a country? It should be obvious. Increasing the level of investment in production of domestic firms, corporations, increasing employment of domestic workers in those industries, and so on. It benefits us. Whenever a foreigner buys a corporate bond from an American corporation, it increases the amount of money that is available to domestic companies to invest, produce, and to hire new people. American firms in America will not hire Chinese or Serbian workers, Americans or residents of America at any point. So see, that's another powerful effect, powerful effects. In this particular case, it would have been rather limited, but nevertheless, you abolish the tariffs, importation increases, the dollar revenue of foreigners increases. That means the demand for American goods and services or the American assets increases. In both cases, American economy benefits. If it's goods and services, good for the current production. If it's investment in American assets, then the future production will benefit. By assets, I mean stock market and bond market securities, stocks and bonds. and other forms of assets. Okay? So that's the situation when you abolish a tariff. So there will be a damage, there will be some one isolated group of people that will be losing, workers in the sweater industry, but an entire society in the long run will be benefiting in many different ways. So you see once again how the free trade policy and abolishing trade restrictions harms and hurts narrow groups of people in the short run significantly, while benefiting very wide group of people, the entire society in the long run. And the gains, individual gains of free trade are smaller and incremental. If you lose your job because of the abolishing of the tariffs, that's a pretty dramatic effect for workers in an industry that loses its privileged position. But the benefits for consumers, because they have cheaper products now, and the income effect that we discussed, all of these would be relatively small, incremental in the short run. So most people wouldn't notice, or wouldn't notice as much the positive effects of free trade policy. So that's one of the reasons for unpopularity of free trade policies and relative popularity of protectionism in politics. Among economists, this is one of the areas in which there is no any significant disagreement about economists. Is protectionism bad, free trade good? From Paul Krugman on the left to Milton Friedman and F.A. Hayek on the right, there's not much difference about this. The tariffs are bad for the economy and the free trade is good. But in politics, it seems almost like the other way around. So protectionism seems to be very popular both on the political left and political right, and among the population as a whole. When you do the poll among the economists, 95% of them, like the questionnaire of professors of economics and financiers, 95% of us say, and even more, free trade is good. Among general population, like 70% are against free trade. One of the explanations, it's not just the lack of whatever economic training or education, is that people are rational and people believe in common sense. Remember what we're discussing. Common sense tells you if you can observe some effects in reality, you can see with your own eyes something that is happening, you tend to think about that effect as being somehow real, or more real than something that you cannot quite see in reality right away. So these benefits that you know must be present, benefits of abolishing tariffs, but they're not so prominently seen in reality. There are long-term benefits that are difficult to measure sometimes, and that you don't feel on a daily basis. Then people tend to discount these effects as somehow less real than to accept the protectionist arguments much more than they would have otherwise done. There's this logic of concentrated benefits, dispersed costs of protectionism, which means benefits for a narrow group, costs for a large group, large benefits for a small group, relatively smaller benefits for a larger group of people. Free trade confers benefits to everybody, but those benefits are gradual, incremental, relatively small, whereas protectionism benefits narrow groups of people very quickly and significantly, while harming everybody gradually and more modestly. Okay, but this is not the whole story. So you can say that there is this, you can say, distributive effect of protectionist policies. So you can see, what does that mean? That means the redistribution of economic welfare, economic benefits from consumers to producers. So protectionism is a policy that maximizes benefits for manufacturers, farmers, and other producers. It's a producer's sovereignty theory, sovereignty of producers. That means that what should guide economic policy is the benefit of industrialists and producers. Whereas free trade policy No tariff policy is based on the idea of consumer sovereignty, which means the consumer benefit is what rules. If we can prove that tariff policy hurts consumers by exposing them to higher prices of consumer goods and lower quality of products, that's enough to disqualify the policy. We shouldn't care about maximizing employment in domestic industries or the profit rates in domestic firms. What is the key benchmark for successful policies, whether that maximizes consumer benefit or not. So then we can say that the free trade policy maximizes the benefit of consumers through low prices and higher quality of products, whereas protectionism benefits domestic producers by offering them the ability to charge higher prices and to innovate less than under the free trade policy, not tariff policy. But that's not the only effect that we have to take into account. That's not the only that's not the only cost of protectionist policies. This redistribution of income from consumers to producers. There is also another effect, which we can call allocative effect, or allocative effect. It means that it reduces. It's not just a zero-sum game in the sense that consumers lose 50 units and they're just transferred to producers. It's just a rip-off of one group of people by another group of people. In the process, the total economic welfare will be reduced. The total gain for society will be reduced. Not only that consumers will lose and producers will gain, but the total amount of gain in the economy will go down. Now, this is sometimes called the dead weight loss. Dead weight loss. That's like you're slicing the pie. You slice the pie into 6 pieces. It's not only that everyone will get, you will redistribute. You take my pie away and then you divide it up among you, 4 of you. It's not only that I'm going to be losing my apple pie and you're going to be gaining. It's a transfer of an economic good from me to you. Actually, in this process of slicing it up, you're going to lose. It will crumble a little bit. So the sum total of your 4 pieces of pie will be less than the whole pie. So that's dead weight loss. So distributional effect is actually that you get a pie, I don't get any. And allocative effect is this, or dead weight loss, is this loss of wealth which disappears in the process of distribution, of redistribution. Okay, how does this process happen in the trade policy? Why tariff policy reduces the total amount of production and total employment in domestic industries? What do you think? Any ideas? This, in order to understand this, you'll have to go back to our previous chapters dealing with prices, dealing with the productivity of the factors of production, and so on. So think for a moment. The first thing that you need to take into account is that factors of production, which means labor, capital, and raw materials, could be moved with some obstacles by and large freely among different industries, especially labor. Can fluctuate. So you can be employed in this branch of industry or that branch. So what is the principle then where people should be working? How factors should be employed? The goal is that you employ the factors of production in those production processes that will create the highest economic value, highest revenue, highest profit rates. So now what happens when you impose a tariff? It's not only that you increase the price of this given good, let's say sweaters, and you transfer money, you force consumers to pay $3 a piece instead of $25. and you increase the income of sweater producers and you reduce the income. So now negative income effect. You see now that you pay more, you have less money to buy, to spend on other goods. So it's not only that you transfer this apple pie from, from consumers to producers, it's also that you impose a systematic negative effect on the economy as a whole by confining labor resources and other resources to an industry that is relatively less productive. So what tariff does, actually it freezes resources in an area in which its productive capacity is lower. Those workers produce lower value than someplace else. Every additional worker who works in this tariff protected industry is one worker less who should be working someplace else and producing something in a much more productive fashion. So see, the tariff policy changes the structure of domestic industry. It systematically shifts resources from the industries and branches of the economy that produce greater value to the industry that produces lower value. How do we know that? We know that because the sweater industry needs tariffs. If it produced the real economic value, it wouldn't need tariff protection. So by maintaining or boosting the industries that need artificial protection, that are relatively less productive, we are pushing scarce resources that we have from the industries that they could be used more productively into industries that they will be used, where they will be used less productive. So then essentially you see that the total economic value created this way would be lower than if we didn't impose tariff policy in the first place. This is on page 80. What is clear is that tariff, though it may increase wages above what they would have been in the protected industries, must on net balance, when all occupations are considered, reduce real wages, reduce them, that is to say, compared to what they would have otherwise would have been in other industries. So you see, by shifting resources from industries where they could produce more effectively. So this is then the basis of modern international trade theory, is that countries and industries should specialize in whatever they can produce at lowest or lower opportunity costs. And by imposing tariffs, you are actually obstructing this process of capital and labor finding the areas in which they can be used to produce the best possible combination of goods. So American domestic tariffs, when we impose tariffs on something that Chinese can produce at lower opportunity cost, not only that we punish American consumers by paying a higher price for domestically produced good that we could have imported from China at a cheaper price, but we are also misdirecting or misallocating domestic resources. You see, that's the allocative effect. We are moving some workers and some resources that should be working, for example, in software industry or some other type of manufacturing. We are pushing them in the area of lower return or lower productivity. So tariff not only that redistributes income from consumers to producers, it misallocates resources, which means pushes labor and capital in wrong places, boosts the wrong kinds of industries that should be scaling down, that should be reduced, and prevents an increase in demand and supply of other industries that should be grown. So that's the key That's the key point, essentially, in international trade theory that Hazlitt anticipates here. It was developed in 1950s. The kind of full-blown theory of international trade is based on opportunity cost theory. This is something that he formulates in 1946 in this book. This idea that trade protectionism has these two different types of costs that are involved: misallocation and redistribution. Okay, how does this apply to modern American economy? Are there any applications of this? I said that economists pretty much agree about benefits of free trade, whereas politicians pretty much agree about the benefits of protectionism. Does that strike you as a fair description of our domestic politics? Yeah. So now Biden is going to be the new president. So Trump was known for his trade protectionism. That was one of the signature policies of the Trump administration. It was kind of contradictory because in domestic front, Trump administration followed free market approach, low taxes, deregulation of the economy. It was quite consistent with the traditional conservative policy. But in foreign trade, they accepted protectionism. Now, what happens with Joe Biden's administration? Have you heard anything, any announcements on that front? I haven't. I was listening very carefully, and I've heard that United States are going to go back to Paris Climate Accord, that Biden will re-emphasize American commitment to internationalism and globalism in the sense like a NATO and a friendship with the European countries, and so on, but nothing about abolishing tariffs. Nothing about new free trade agreements with other countries. And when you look at it politically, this free trade theory is equally, I was going to say dead in the water, but maybe not dead in the water, but highly unpopular among the Democratic constituency and voters and politicians, as it is among the Republicans as well. They're now competing with Marco Rubio, who used to be, I remember very distinctly, when he was a Tea Party candidate in 2010, 11. He was full of the talk about free market economics, free enterprise, free trade. We don't need excessive government intervention. Now he's talking about working class policy for the Republican Party and the dangers of globalism and so on. He sounds almost like Bernie Sanders when it comes to trade. Of course, he sounds like Donald Trump. That's to be expected. But have this convergence, in a sense, that both parts of both major political parties seem to be now much more on board with protectionist policies. So this changed. I can tell you that in 1990s, you know what NAFTA is. North American Free Trade Area, free trade agreement between Canada, United States, and Mexico. It's not a free trade. Technically, it's a kind of reduction of the pre-existing trade barriers. It's a managed trade, but nevertheless, it was a step in the direction of greater free trade. You know who was the president who signed NAFTA, and when was that? No, it was renegotiated actually under the Trump administration, but nothing changed dramatically. Trump had simply politically to show that he did something for American workers. There were some changes, but they were inconsequential. It's essentially NAFTA is with us in the same form. In 1995, Bill Clinton. And you know why Bill Clinton? How Bill Clinton ended up supporting this? because he was pressured by Republicans in the House of Representatives. In 1990s, Bill Clinton was the president, and the Democrats have a majority in the Senate, but House of Representatives was controlled by Republicans. You know who was the Speaker of the House, 1990s? Yeah, Newt Gingrich. Newt Gingrich pressured the Republicans in the House of Representatives for free trade at that time. Democrats were reluctant for obvious reasons, because Democrats were back then and still are the trade union party. The unions are the biggest boosters, the biggest interest group that supports the Democrats, and the unions don't like globalization because it threatens the artificially high wages. So in domestically unionized industries, so imported goods can jeopardize the union privileges. So Bill Clinton was reluctant. So that Republicans were instrumental in that. Republicans back then were the party of free trade. And not only that, in 1980s and 1990s, Republicans were a party of free immigration, larger immigration. You know who was the president who legalized the like 10 million of illegal immigrants? 1980s. Ronald Reagan personally. So many changes happened in America in the last 20 years or so. So these two policies enjoyed pretty much a consensus of both political parties for a while. That's relatively kind of open immigration policy, and certain temporary push for free trade, especially after communism broke down in 1990s. Everything that smelled of free market was popular, both in the West and in the East. Okay. Any questions? Any comments? Any comments about this connection between free trade, protectionism, and the geopolitical developments? Do you think that China is who thinks that China is a partner to America right now and it should be treated as a partner? How many of you believe that? Chinese communist government in Beijing. Okay. How many of you think that China is a problem or enemy or the opponent? Okay. Okay, if we believe that China, what is the reason? Why do you think that China is a problem or an enemy or an opponent to be careful about rather than a partner? What is the reason for that? Those of you who think that China is an enemy, why is that the case? Is Canada enemy? Is European Union enemy? What is the difference?
I don't think necessarily China should be the, but I obviously don't think that they're our closest ally, but they definitely should be with a lot of the past history and things that they've done. They shouldn't be lightly, I guess.
So just a bit louder.
They shouldn't be taken lightly. They should be very comfortable with their past.
Because of their past, what they've done. What do you have in mind?
In terms of like, just create like very communist.
Oh, ideological one. Okay. So
Yeah, I mean, so in World War II, Japan didn't invade, and they were on Japan's side. In the Korean War, they fought against us. In Vietnam, they supplied the North Vietnamese army.
Yeah.
In Iraq, they were supplying the Iraqis with weapons and stuff.
no, they supply Pakistan and Iran.
Yeah.
Cooperate with them. Okay, so this ideological, you cannot believe the Communist Party that's the only surviving among the major powers communist government, essentially. Now, you can say it's a full communist government. It's a communist government that runs a capitalist or semi-capitalist economy. But nevertheless, they consider America to be the enemy. That's the way. They want to undermine the American America-dominated international trade system and system of international relations. So
I think that if I consider a part of us, if America is the world and the consumer and we are the producer, why not be partners with it? It will be not fair.
okay, so what do you think of that? Why wouldn't we, partnering with China, we might have a better shot at changing the domestic conditions in China?
This is China looks at us as the enemy and we can do on them, taking its heavy and crops by us and we go
Okay.
America in general wants to wipe out communism. So,
Okay. Why would that be the case? Why would America need to wipe out communism? What's the problem? If they're communists, we trade with them. Who cares? Our president says no more regime changes. Realists, international relations. If they want to be communists, let them be communists. Why would we bother? Why would we worry about that?
Communism was in the opposition to capitalism in history. And so that's what the capitalists state.
Okay.
That's why most of the communism is the beast towards democracy in free world.
Why would we care about that? Can they invade America? Do you think really that the Chinese communists would invade America and impose communism here?
Well, we did not have to be here once they take one or two countries like we no more happy.
Okay.
We also need to look at the fact that China is the second leading nuclear missile country in the world. So it's not even
Okay, so they're hostile and they're nuclear power. They're more powerful than Russia, actually. And people are worried about Russia, but Russian economy is of the size of Italy. Russian GDP is like Italian GDP. Chinese GDP is almost like American. So,
Economically, like China
yeah.
uses its currency to help Africa and influence countries that help them, like the UN, for example, to help develop, where they recognize Cuba's human rights and stuff. So they use their money to influence things that are
in the direction that is detrimental for American national interests. So that's one of the reasons. There are two schools of thought when it comes to countries such as China or Russia. That we should be working with them and giving like sticks and carrots, more carrots, less sticks. That was the argument in 1990s where Bill Clinton proposed China to be admitted in the World Trade Organization. That was the argument of Bush administration's policy, Obama's administration policy, and Trump's policy towards Russia and Vladimir Putin. Open up, make them wealthier, integrate them into the economic system. They will have to play by rules sooner or later. That was the experience that people had with the Latin American and South European dictatorships, such as Chile and Argentina and Italy and Greece and Spain. The expectation was the way how things evolved in these countries was that with the economic development, relatively soon people started demanding political change and rule of law and democracy, and eventually dictatorships were replaced by democratic governments. So that was the expectations that the same thing will happen in Russia and China. We cannot expect them right now to be democratic countries in the same sense in which America and Western Europe are, but with economic development, this so-called authoritarian modernization, they will economically develop and eventually they will develop democracy. Now, in the last 5 or 6 years or so, this school of thought it's not popular anymore. It seems, at least, what's happening in China? What is the most atrocious thing that we witnessed in the last few years? Hong Kong. They're squashing the autonomy of Hong Kong. They're threatening Taiwan. What else? Inside China, really horrible stuff is going on.
historically the Tibetans, but now the Uyghurs.
The Uyghurs, they're keeping like 1 million people in concentration camps. It's really like we haven't seen anything like that since, I don't know, since the World War II. It's a regime that is getting worse and worse politically in the last 10 years, not better and better. So now what to do now? So it seems now, this is the argument of those people, cynical people, quote unquote, who don't believe that China is a partner. We actually just gave them the resources to develop this fascist, essentially semi-fascist state that is a competitor to the United States. They don't have any intention of democratizing and imposing the rule of law and being friendly to the Western world anytime soon. They want to impose their own empire. They're working in Africa, in Asia. They're pressuring their neighbors, India, Vietnam, and so on. So now, what to do now? So now, this is the logic was that actually they will not go to war or in conflict with America because there is a logic of economic interdependence. China depends on America, America depends on China. We import so much goods from China. They're our creditors. They have so much money in our banks, in our financial institutions, in government bonds, in private bonds. So they will not burn down all of that for political reasons. Unfortunately, it seems sometimes that people are not motivated only by economic gains, economical gains. History is driven sometimes by other areas, political domination, nationalism, whatever you want to call it. Okay, we're almost out of time. Any final thoughts? Final questions? Okay, then. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody, and I will see you all next Tuesday. Safe travels if you decide to travel, and see you soon.